Connecticut, there are different kinds of cultural organizations, and specifically in the museum environment, from very small to very large. And we all have different levels of comfort in working with our legislators and our elected leaders. I think the most important thing that I'd like to say in terms of demystifying what that looks like is they're our neighbors. They have, on some fundamental level, a responsibility to us. So it's an opportunity, whether it's a congressional member or a mayor or a state senator or state representative that represents us, to build a relationship and get them to know you and your organization. So it's important, just some very elemental relationship things that you would do with a new neighbor. Invite them over, share a story with them, invite them to an event or program. These basic invitations or opportunities to engage are the foundations of a relationship. And those are really important. In so doing, I think also we need to be conscious of how we shape a narrative. For somebody who doesn't know you, who doesn't know your organization, one of the things that I've been encouraging a lot of league members and others across the state is to shape a story. What's your story? Why do you matter to your constituents, to the people you serve? And making sense of that on an organizational level. I think many of us grapple with that. I've been visiting a lot of communities across Connecticut with our staff. Some are really struggling to shape a narrative. Some have a narrative really locked down and want to tell it. And I think this is an opportunity where Connecticut Humanities and the League and NEMA can all help us grapple with that, shaping our individual and collective narrative, whether it's our organization or our community. Those are things that we're here to support and guide all of you with. And just to build out of that a little bit more, in the work that we've been doing with the Connecticut legislative body, and especially with the governor's office more recently, we're trying to speak more and more their language and understand how they make their decisions. And what I've begun to recognize is that a lot of decisions are made around economic, educational, and social impacts. And I think the more that we can define what those are for our particular organizations and what they mean to our communities, the more skilled we can become in telling our stories and advocating for increased support. So I think as we talk about economic impact, there are new resources that are available to all of you. We hope to do some additional sharing of content, and I'm specifically referencing Arts and Economic Prosperity 6, which is a report released last fall, and something that was presented up in the Legislative Office building this spring. And this really allows us to think on an individual and community level, but also statewide level, about the economic impact our organizations have in terms of how people spend their money when they attend your organization, and all of the dividends that pays in other ways, from restaurant spends to hotel stays to parking fees and so on. Every time somebody comes to your organization or your community, there's additional dollars involved. And what we try to do is communicate the broader impact that will resonate when additional investments are made. The educational impacts that we have, I think sometimes we get caught in telling our own story and thinking about our audience in a particular way. There are other ways that we're looking to expand our audiences and your connectivity to those audiences through educational frameworks and curriculum. So thinking about the new social studies frameworks that were adopted this year, and how do our educational programs that are, whether it's a local historical society or an art museum or the science center, what does that look like in terms of communicating the content and translating it to provide a roadmap for educators and for the students that they're trying to engage. I think we all have part of that educational piece, and if we can think of ourselves as part of that ecosystem of knowledge, we can provide wraparound support that educators don't typically think of themselves as part of or wanting to engage. And then finally, the social impacts. What makes Connecticut an exceptional place to live, work, and play? What draws people to our communities are the cultural resources. We are, as many of you know, an incredibly culturally dense state, but we can often act in incredible silos. And I think the more we can connect our organizations, the more we can encourage people to share our connected stories, as well as venturing to other towns, we're gonna be able to convey why that matters in terms of our not just social health, but our civic health. What makes us sort of volunteer? How do we do that in our communities? How do we engage and support our community anchors through our museums? The last thing I want to say about that, which goes back to the economic impact that I want to really encourage thinking around, that comes out of AEP 6, the Arts and Economic Prosperity Study, is beginning to think about our organizations as businesses and how we communicate that. So really beginning to understand the sort of economic engine that each of our organizations is, and communicating that to our legislators so that they see us as investments and not liabilities. I think that's one of the clear things that has been important in how we talk about ourselves. Many of you know the next we have elections coming up this fall in Connecticut, and the next legislative cycle will begin in January. And Connecticut Humanities and partners are beginning to craft both a gubernatorial ask as well as a legislative ask, and the sort of key pieces of that. And while we don't have anything in place right now, we're working closely with our partners in the arts and tourism, and through that as well, Lodging Association and the Restaurant Association. So we're building a coalition of people who are thinking about how our constituencies intersect and support one another. And I would encourage you to just stay tuned, as we will have further direction and messaging for all of you in terms of how we will communicate that to the legislature, and how we'll ask you and prepare you to share this sort of economic, educational, and social information and impacts with your elected representatives. And I will say that we do have a very supportive elected body, but there are multiple and competing interests in our sectors. You know, a lot of energy and interest is put into housing, healthcare, and higher ed. So we need to be vocal about our needs as well. And the more we can communicate that impact, the more success we'll have.